Blessings to you all. I trust that you've had a blessed Chag HaMatzot, a feast of matzat, sweetness, as you were mindful of getting rid of all the chametz, all that sourness. I had a wonderful time in the Karoo with my family and the broader family, and I hope that you, wherever you may have been, I hope you've had a wonderful feast and that you found some beautiful fellowship wherever you were. We're now in the season commonly called the counting of the Omer, which a really technical friend of mine said, "What's with the counting of the Omer? We aren't counting the Omer." And it's true. It's kind of a shorthand way of saying we're counting from the days when the Omer was presented in the temple, the day of the first fruits barley offering. And so if some of you are wondering where are these Omer measurements you need to be counting, you don't have to worry. It's about counting the 7 weeks from the first Omer of barley until the next first fruits Omer measurement that was given at the Feast of Weeks. So come Shabbat, wherever you are, you will be on day 7 of the count, and we have 6 more weeks of counting, with the day after, the 50th day, being the day of the feast. This teaching will contemplate the meaning of the 7 repetition and why many of us are believing it points to Mount Sinai and covenants in general. For those of you who don't know, many have challenged the Pharisaic rabbinic tradition for the Feast of Shavuot, that it is connected to Israel making the covenant at Mount Sinai. Now we know without a doubt that it is the Feast of Weeks, it's a Feast of Harvest and a Day of First Fruits, but there's been some skepticism around its connection, or the rabbinic connection, to Sinai. This being said, although not specifically stated in the Torah and the prophets, even die-hard Pashat plain readers of the text, like myself and Nehemiah Gordon and others, we can't say with full certainty, but we are more and more overwhelmingly convinced that the 50th day is a good time for the remembrance of the covenant at Sinai and for the renewal of oaths, even though not specifically stated. But we really can see it as a genuine connection. Firstly, when Israel left Egypt and began to wander in the various wildernesses on their way to Sinai, when look at the timeline, it really seems to have been 7 weeks of journeying till they were at Sinai and entered into that covenant. Shavuot, as Karaites, Sadducees, Samaritans, and more importantly, how I believe Messiah taught it, it'll always be at the beginning of the 3rd month. And so it isn't lost on people, the description in Exodus 19 in how Israel arrived at Sinai at the beginning of the 3rd month, around 7 weeks from when the host left Ramses in Exodus 19, verse 1. We read, "On the 3rd new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai." And then they were given 3 days of preparation, and so the 7 weeks count really does seem to point to connecting Shavuot with when he spoke audibly to all Israel, presenting himself as a covenant partner to them. Another passage that points to this is Ezekiel 16, where Yehovah describes Israel as an infant slowly growing, and then he says, Ezekiel 16 and verse 8, "When I passed by you again and saw you, behold, you were at the age for love, and I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord Yehovah, and you became mine." The Hebrew here says that God made a shavah, an oath, which lines up with the early part of the voice being heard from Mount Sinai with the name and swearing by himself and in his own name that we were meant to take oaths. And so it really connects there to Sinai. And I find it quite interesting and deep that within the wedding ceremony of Jewish people, they have this tradition of a bride will walk around a groom 7 times. And usually they say this about a passage in Isaiah about a woman will surround a man. However, in the context of covenant and sevens, I think this ancient practice has more with the connection of Sheva, 7, and making oaths, Shavah, when establishing covenant. Now this brings me to Beersheba, which means well of 7. And this is how the vowels are traditionally put for the city. However, the name can be read differently, and if you don't know this already, our God is a very punny Elohim. He loves idioms and plays on words that often our English versions just are oblivious to. The best we can see with this word plays on names, like when Yeshua said to Simon, your name is Peter, and on this Petros, rock, will I build my church? And we get very excited we found a word play there. But we can even get this with the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew. Usually it didn't make any sense when it said, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people. However, in the Hebrew, with the Shem Tov, we can see, if given in that language, it makes more sense. You shall call his name Yeshua, for he shall Yoshia his people. And so we really see that there are a lot of these word puns and idioms that are in Scripture, and especially in the Hebrew texts. And so, they have dozens there, and many don't know this, but there's one that is with the city of Beersheba. Now, the first time we encounter this settlement is with Abraham, where he made a Shavah oath with Abimelech and Pichol, the commander of the Canaanite armies in that area. And part of the sealing of the Shavah oath, that promise or that vow, was that Abraham slaughtered Sheva, 7 sheep. And I believe it's been proven since the 11th century that Hebrew words and related Semitic languages like Aramaic and Arabic, that their words have these 3-letter roots to them. There are apparently a few exceptions, but they're not worth talking about. And now we see with the word for 7 and for oath that they share the same 3-letter Hebrew root. And this is why in some biblical dictionaries, oath is described as sevening yourself. And so too the number 7 has a sense of completion, finality, and establishing, like what happens when you covenant and you swear by oath and you ratify contracts. So after Abraham, Isaac would return to the place of the oath, Shavah, and he would renew the covenant with Abimelech and Pichol, which had gotten strained. And it says that they had a feast, which I think would have maybe been another slaughtering of 7 Sheva sheep. And then Isaac's workers, they dug and they found water. They had a well, a be'er, and so Isaac named the place Be'er Sheva, well of 7, or should it be Beersheva, well of oath? And so you can see, you can't help but see that there is this interconnectedness, and well of 7 has definitely seemed to have stuck, but it is still in the context of being mindful of this related word of oath. And so too with the feast of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, that is what is stuck. But we again wonder whether an element of being mindful of Shavuot, oaths, in the season may also be something we should be mindful of. And this connection was made by a very a zealous and religiously ascetic community, very removed. You may have heard of them. They were called the Essenes. And they seem to have had quite an issue with the priesthood, which they saw this. It's a couple of centuries before a Messiah came in flesh. They really had issue with the priesthood, and which they saw as being abolished because of their sins. And Messiah would seem to have acknowledged the sins, but he saw it as an institution worthy of reforming and cleansing. Nevertheless, the Essenes, people think that they may have been of common Levites as opposed to Aaron's descendants. This might explain the strong scribal tradition they had. And nevertheless, they're believed to have compiled a book around 170 to 100 BC called the Book of Jubilees. And in their retelling of Genesis in the book, they would relate where oaths were made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which we see in Genesis, I think also with Noah. And these Shavuot oaths were connected. They connect to the Feast of Shavuot, the harvest festival. Now, this is hard to prove and is viewed by most as an idea of eisegesis, putting ideas into the text as opposed to naturally exegeted passages or ideas from the text. So this is most particularly seen with the sect that was in Qumran. And although we should admire them for their scribal tradition, they didn't just have the 7 sevens to Shavuot that we are busy with, but Shavuot would start another count of 7 sevens to the Feast of the First Fruits of the New Oil, and then another 50 days to the Feast of the New Wine. And for many, this seems to have gone beyond what was written and may have a form of godliness to it and a puritanical desire, but seems to have added to Scripture if these are viewed as law, and they're certainly presented in that way. Now, even though many don't like how these scenes almost made it a requirement that oaths were made exclusively on Shavuot, let's not be dismissive of the origin of the idea, which may have come from the same connection of sevens and oaths that we saw at Beersheba, and being worthy of that connection. And so anyway, wrapping things up, I and others feel that Shavuot is a time of being mindful of the covenant of Sinai. And as a bride circling these 7 cycles, which climax in union, so we should have anticipation, desire, and hope as we get to the 50th day after completing our 7 sevens. And for this reason, I think it was very fitting that the disciples waited in hope, anticipation, and longing as the days climaxed to a significant day of new covenant in the seal of the Spirit poured out with genuine gifts that were manifesting. As we head up to Shavuot, the Feast of Sevens, I'm reminded of how covenant is like Beersheba, a well of life that needs to be revisited and renewed, to dig again and search for the waters of life and pursue our first love again. However, just remember this is a double-edged sword. Let's not forget that Israel's Messiah is the messenger of the covenant, and the image of God who spoke to Moses said, I am a jealous Elohim. As Paul would say, you've been bought with a price. And Israel's Messiah loves all his sheep and has a righteous form of possession and ownership, that if we adulterate the covenant, then you will experience curses and we hurt his heart. And he requires that we be faithful to that covenant. All Israel needs to be grafted into him, and we need to pray for all Am Yisrael to heed the one our Father placed amongst us, and to whom our Father said, listen to him, my name is in him. So, this covenant in its cycles would eventually be made in his very own body, a body afflicted, and even in his blood. So let us, in this period, really look back to those moments where we said things on earth, and maybe like Isaac, we need to go back and reestablish the treaties and the covenants that we have made. Remembrance and renewal are important. And so let's not make this counting from the day of the Omer just a counting, but one of reestablishing, of recalling, of remembering, so that we arrive at the mountain mindful of the season of betrothal. And many blessings to you as you count the Shavuot, and be mindful of the Shavuot that he has made with us and those that we have made with him. Blessings and Shabbat Shalom.